Elaine Sorensen has been with us since November 2001. I'm sure all of you have seen her around the campus. She runs a camera here on Channel 6, as a matter of fact, but a lot of other things she's done around the campus, and we're going to find out about some of those today. But before we get into what she's done here at Green Spring, we're going to talk about some of her past history, especially in the areas of the CCRAs. She was instrumental in forming the California CCRA and worked hard to get the national CCRA going. And she's going to tell us what the importance is of CCRAs in our life. She has a doctorate degree and actually, I think, 4 masters. So we're going to find out something about Elaine here in a few minutes. So welcome, Elaine. It's certainly nice to have you today.
Thank you. I'm nervous, but glad to be here.
Well, after all you've done in life, you surely can't be nervous before a few cameras here.
And the older you get, you know, the more things seem to drift out of your mind. So I've made some notes.
Before we start talking about your life, you know, I note that you have a great garden.
Oh, I do.
Around your patio, and
yes,
it's bigger than most people's gardens. You must like gardening.
Oh, well, you know, that garden has a history, too,
Oh, is that right?
because when I moved into Carter Terrace, the terrace level, there was not much going on. That was a brand new building, and it looked pretty awful. And they knew I wanted a garden. They said, you can garden to the fence. And I thought, oh, boy, I'll never go. But I did. And so that garden has been grandfathered in because it's the one bright spot on the way to the nature trail.
And you can see it from the bridge as you cross from Village Square to Connor Terrace, is it?
That's right.
You look out to the right, and the last apartment down the hill there is Elaine's, so you get a chance to see it. Well, tell us about your family. What they do, where do they live?
Well, I have a very, very small family. I have my older daughter, Catherine, has her doctorate in international business law, and she's the Assistant Counsel General for Northwestern Mutual in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My second daughter, Janet, has her master's in theater arts management, and then when after she was married and had young children, she got a master's in library science. So she now is the resource librarian in Falls Church at their library. My son-in-law, David, recently retired from the Department of Defense, and he was an engineer and naval architect. And I have 2 grandchildren, Emily, who graduated from, and Emily and Andrew both graduated from UVA. Emily is a master teacher and is working in Seattle. And Andrew is working on his doctoral fellowship program at Chapel Hill, and he's doing biochemical research, whatever that means. Well, I have a very small immediate family, but I'm fortunate to have my extended Green Spring family, and that makes a lot of difference.
Well, you got a PhD, and you know, at our age group, not many women got a PhD.
Right, that's right.
Could you tell us about your college?
Well, you're right, because, and this was many years ago, you understand, the college education for women was not very readily available for many reasons, cultural among them, as well as financial reasons. And yet I had a high school counselor who said to me, you have a gift, don't waste it.
You have a gift for?
For I don't know what. Oh. Who knows what, a talent or a gift. And she just said, you know, think beyond and don't waste it. So she was the one who recommended that I take advantage of the Army Cadet Nurse Corps.
This was during World War II.
It was during World War II, and so when I was 17, I joined that. Now that was the retreat. After what I'm stumbling now. After a year and a half, that program was discontinued. I mean, the war was over, so supposedly over. It wasn't over for many people. And so I continued with my education and continued to work in VA hospitals. But that opened the door for me because I never had a grand plan. I just took life as it came along. And when I was asked if I had done this or that, I'd say, well, no, but I guess I can do that. So I ended up little by little, year by year, going to night school, going to summer school, and gathering experience in education and administration, and research and so on. And finally, I was, again, lucky that I was recommended for a brand new doctoral program out in California.
When was this?
That was 1965.
Oh.
And I was...
I happened to be there at the same time.
Oh, and I was 39 years old, or going on 40, and they said, why would a 40-year-old woman go into an 8-year doctoral program? So, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I did, and that's how I really was very fortunate, and these opportunities came my way. So.
Well, so you moved from Wisconsin to California. Well, you had a very interesting career, and apparently your education sort of followed your career based on what was wanted in it. Could you give us some highlights in what your career?
Of course. A couple of them back in Milwaukee. I was the assistant director of a program where Marquette University College of Nursing affiliated with what was then called the Milwaukee Sanitarium. And it was during the era when psychotropic medications were just coming into being. They had
psychotropic, I don't know that term.
Well, those are the mind medications, tranquilizers, and so on. And Australia had used medication to a great degree, but not around the world. And so we were at the Research and Training Hospital that was developed in the cooperation of these two programs. We were looking at alternative ways, especially of treating mental illness with young people. And that gave me an opportunity to really be involved in a brand new program. And we had appointments, dual appointments at the university and at the psychiatric hospital. And due to my research and experience there, which we would travel around to conferences and so on, talking about what we were doing, I came to the attention of National Institute of Mental Health. And they were the ones that asked me if I would enter this doctoral program with the idea of focusing on change and on interdisciplinary cooperation. And so that's how I had my second, I say, highlight event of my career, because I entered the doctoral program, and they were, the NIMH was able to say to the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto that we will fund this 5-year grant for you, but this is the person who's going to be the research and training director. And so that program, which I was doing at the same time that I was at UC Medical Center and in Berkeley, working on my doctorate.
So now you've moved, or have you moved now from Wisconsin
I was living in California
to Palo
then.
Alto?
Right.
Okay.
And so I was lucky. I was given this opportunity. Never thought this would happen to me. And so because the lure of having Stanford and Palo Alto was such that we were able to have students apply for this kind of training. It was a 3-month program for graduate service providers. We had clergy, we had doctors, we had nurses, we had policemen, we had teachers, anyone who was interfacing with the public. And the idea was the mantra was think outside your discipline and outside your comfort zone. And so my dissertation was on the kinds of changes that these students were able to accomplish. So that, again, it was just an opportunity that I had. And so then from then I went on to being research and training director at Administration on Aging, again in California, of the 3 Bay Area counties of San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. And we were looking at the aging population.
Those are fairly far apart, San Francisco.
But that in the Bay Area, everybody drives up and down the freeway.
That's true, sure.
Highway 1, up and down the freeway.
Yeah.
And but we were realizing with our research that we were seeing 4-generation families, and 2 of them were often retired. So that demographic was changing. We laughed, some of us, that all of a sudden the world is so surprised that all these seniors are around. We knew some of that years ago. But that also was an interesting program because I was involved in looking what was available.
Now we're talking, what year frame, what frame, no, time frame?
Oh, that was in the
80s?
70s to 80s.
Okay.
I got my doctorate in 75. So it was,
So it's 10 years.
yeah.
Okay.
That's right. So that occurred after that, but that's when I really got an interest in services for the 55 plus population. And that's when I also was interested then on the sideline in the politics of all of this and the funding of all of it. You can't, and I was doing licensing and accreditation and so on. So those experiences really focused me then on what was available, such as CCRC living. And
now, what, do you recall, I remember in Livermore in about 1965, we had a retirement village where people, you know, over, I don't know if it was over 60 or over 50, but I think it was over 60, but it was a village where only those people could live, and that was the first one I'd ever heard of. And this was Livermore in about 65. My boss's family, he moved his mother and father there, as a matter of fact. And they enjoyed
well, there
it.
was a history in our country going way back to the 1800s where religious groups would take care of the elderly. So there has been that kind of history. But most of the, in our lifetime, most of them were what they called life care facilities. As opposed to here at Greenspring, we are in partnership. We don't give them all our money. And you know, that to me was always the most difficult aspect of that. Why would you give them all your money? You don't know what's around the corner.
So that's what they had to give them all their money?
The early ones, right. Either you had no money or the money you had. In fact, my husband and I, Floyd, used to build and run hospitals. And he was also a fellow of the American Association of Healthcare Executives. And the two of us in later years founded Sorensen Associates. And we used to consult with healthcare providers in terms of how best to meet all the requirements. In fact, we consulted with the terraces in Los Gatsis, which was their, that area, their life care CCRC. But again, you had to give them all your money. In the meantime, we were also consulting with other healthcare providers. We did turnkey operations. Over the years, I even got a certificate from Eschweiler & Eschweiler in interior design and architectural design, and I learned to do blueprinting, to draw blueprints and read blueprints. So, I mean, it's funny how things just come in your life and you do them.
Was that part of Sorensen and Associates? So you actually got into construction.
You bet. I'd wear a hard hat and I'd be on the scene. And it was, I loved it. I did.
Was this in the 80s and 90s? Or? Okay.
And so, but then we were looking around for some other options as far as retirement was concerned, and that's how we found Escaton Village, right outside of Sacramento in Carmichael, and that I need to say that really was an opportunity for the two of us, because it was the business we were in, and we got very involved politically, and so we were in those days. The California Residents Association was working very closely with the group called ASA, which is now the American Association of Hospital Services for the Aging. They now call themselves Leading Age.
Leading Age, okay. I think I've heard of that.
Yes, well, you should have, because that's what we Greenspring is a member of that group.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of cooperation in California between these organizations, the residents organization and the providers organization.
Was a similar activity going on throughout the country, or was this just California?
Well, that's when NACRA was just starting, but California was way ahead. Okay. And we wrote a bill a year got through the legislation in those later years benefiting seniors. And one of the bills that we worked on was the right to return home bill.
Oh.
And that bill meant that if you were at a CCRC campus and had been hospitalized, all things being equal, you were able to return to your campus to recover, instead of having the insurance company sending you to some cheaper nursing home down the road.
Oh.
And that was successfully passed in California, and with the support of ASA, was taken nationally. And I need to say to you that I just saw in the paper yesterday this little article about Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland. She was the lady who took on this project nationally and had it passed, as it was called then, the Senior Access Bill. And she's now, they describe her as a trailblazing lawmaker who will retire at the end of 2016 after 4 decades in Congress. So all of us here owe her a debt of gratitude. The other thing that I was working on then, we were doing accreditation at Eschaton Village. And since I had been working with hospitals and familiar with Bill of Rights, the rights for patients, we heard a lot about that over the years. To one of the bills we were doing, I attached the Bill of Rights for CCRC residents. And that was also something that we talked about with accreditation. And by a stroke of luck, that passed without any difficulty. Oh. So in 1998, California was one of the first to have on record a Bill of Rights for residents.
So our CCRCs are accredited just like colleges are accredited?
They can be, and in fact, well, that's jumping ahead in some ways about getting to Green Spring, but it was right after that, shortly after that my husband died. And so then I knew it was time for me to start to move on. So.
Well, you certainly were involved in retirement communities in California, but would you tell us a little bit more about the California CCRA and the National CCRA, because you were apparently there at the beginning. You established or were able to develop bills that were passed by not Congress, but by the California legislature that established rules and regulations for the communities.
Well, it's certainly, my father was an attorney and a politician, and I said I would never be an attorney and a politician. Well, welcome to the real world, Elaine.
Yeah, we got
because no matter what you were doing, you really had to. Yeah. And so, yes, I was surprised when I came to Green Spring that the culture was so different than it was in California. Oh. Because people were involved in a lot of things. Now, right now, I'm glad I'm not living in California. But in those days, it really expanded my experiences a lot.
You know, I felt the same way. I enjoyed living. I lived there for 5 years. I got my master's at USC, and then that was 2 years, and then I moved up to Livermore, which is just east of San Francisco.
Yes, yes.
And my family enjoyed California very much. But I too have seen so many changes there that what we saw then is very good and living has slowly or quickly, I don't know which, changed. But let's not get on California politics, but stick with their CCRA.
One of the things that they did in California was to pass the Proposition 13. Were you there? Yeah. And that was one of the things I consulted with a venerable organization that had been providing multiple residential locations for treatment of children with emotional problems and learning disabilities. And that organization was about ready to go out of business because people, I don't want to pay taxes, but what was their tax dollar buying? They weren't thinking. And a lot of programs struggled in those days. Yeah. That's when I had the opportunity to, we were presenting a program for them, and they said, well, we'll try this if you will be our executive director. So I stayed there for 4.5 years as their executive director and took them out of bankruptcy and into getting the highest reimbursement rate in the state. So again, it was just an accidental experience. But those were the things that prepared me for looking around after my husband died, and I knew I had to move. And we knew of John Erickson because in the early days, every long-term care facility, life care, had to have an association with a hospital, because after all, you would be expecting that your resident. And so we were aware of a lot of the programs in the country. John Erickson's program stood out among all of them.
Oh, good.
And it was in the industry. He was so well respected. I thank him every day for the vision he had about services for middle-class seniors and maintaining dignity in life. I thank him every day for that. So obviously then when it was time for me to move, I looked around, and my husband and I had been on the mailing list for Erickson since 1995 and waiting for them to get down into Virginia area. And so I did move in 2001, so when I got here, the other interesting thing, I was talking to one of my neighbors in California who said, "Oh, I hear you're leaving. Well, we're sorry to lose you, but where are you going?" And so, "Oh, Eric, I have a sister who is living in Virginia." "Oh, where is she?" She's living at Green Spring. And I said, "Oh my goodness, that's where I'm going." So her name was Ann Noland, and so he put us in touch, and I knew a lot, and they knew I was coming, and he told them about all the things I was doing in California. So they were ready for me when I got here.
I'll bet.
And I think that's how I got involved in the health committee, and then with the finance committee. And by the way, the finance committee at that time was overlooking the purchase option here, which we
which option?
The purchase option,
okay.
which we exercised.
I mean, Green Spring buying itself from Erickson?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they had been accumulating money since the day they opened, so that they would have the money to be able to take over. And in fact, that's how John Erickson kept going. Then he'd take that money for another place. Some people weren't in favor. Why don't we keep on renting? No, that doesn't work. But we then became our own 501c3, independent.
Now that was when, about 2003?
That was 2003 and 4. 2003 and 4, right. I have to write some notes because I don't remember everything. But when I was elected to the council, I was also elected as president, because again they said, "You're in the business. If you don't do it, who should?" Yeah. And so I was here.
Was this when the council first started, or
did
we have a council back earlier?
By this time was 2005.
Okay.
And so I was president of 2005, 6, 7, and 8.
So we had established a council. Did we
and it was
establish a council?
It was very different than what I was accustomed to.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very informal, and I am the kind who likes standards, and I like to try to get all the accreditation that you can, to be as good as you can be, and so we sort of formalized it. Yeah. And I think a lot of the changes that happened at that time were really what set the mode, if you will, for what Green Spring is today. I think the year that we worked on accreditation was especially important. Ben Cornthwaite was here as administrator over at what's called Renaissance Garden, and he can attest to the work we all put in it, residents and staff, for one whole year, and we got a full 5-year accreditation. The only areas they suggested for improvement were in safety and in ADA compliance, and so we should all thank Ben also, because he really laid the foundation for the 5-star program we now have there at Garden. Now it is Garden Ridge. Yeah.
Did we had a problem with ADA?
Yes, well, we didn't have the curb cuts then. And now, you got to realize we don't get federal money, so we don't have to be...
but we're a CCRC, you would think ADA has to be...
Yes, they are what they call reasonable accommodation. And there are all kinds of... If it's an extraordinary amount of money, no, because you come here freely. You're not forced to come here. Yeah. And when you come to a CCRC, it's of your own free will. And so then you expect reasonable accommodations. And as we age in place, I think that's one of the things now that we need to look at. I'm also sorry that we don't continue accreditation anymore, because I think We're not up to the standard we were in those days.
Oh, so we're not accredited anymore?
No. Well, it was I think it was a matter of finances
Now,
because
Garden Ridge is accredited.
there's a difference between licensure, certification, and accreditation, and a lot
Okay.
of people don't understand
I
that.
guess I don't.
Licensure and certification are the kinds of things that allow you to operate and sell services to the community. Accreditation is what you freely take on to see how this is an international standard now called CCAC and CARF, and it tells you how you rate. An outside professional comes in, tells you how do you rate with the rest of the industry, and I think it's always good to know what you should be looking at going forward. So those are some of the things that by the way, I also want to mention Ron Walker, because he was the national president of Ericsson, and he had his model of the three-legged stool, and we did a lot of team building when he was here, because the three-legged stool was the management, the board, the management, and the residents, and it was wonderful.
Yeah. So you had a very good relationship with management as president of the council.
It was excellent. Ian Brown was our executive director, and he was definitely a trained exec, and he was all for team building.
We're down to 2 minutes.
Uh-oh, where does the time go? Well, I think I've pretty much covered what I have in my notes here, except I didn't talk a lot about what was accomplished during those years.
Yeah.
But maybe that'll be another story.
Well, you've seen changes here.
Yes, I have.
And what are some of the major changes that you've seen?
Well, for example, in the physical plant, we often used to kid that this plant was built for junior college, kids who could run up and down the stairs, and our venues, our large venues are underground. It really is a challenging site, but it's gorgeous. I've been to 10 Ericsson. I wouldn't go to another one. This is the best one there is. But then we have to live with what we've got. So that we've tried to accommodate that. I'm sorry we now don't seem to pay much attention to the safety program that took thousands of hours of volunteer resident time.
Yeah.
So things like that. I also would say to residents, you got to be patient, because, for example, we were talking about no smoke, free smoke area for years. In California, it was the thing to do. It was finally here at Green Spring after 7 years, and the same thing with the chapel window. It wasn't installed properly. We were all upset, but we waited and waited, and now it's here.
Now it's here. Now it's installed properly.
So just be patient.
Yeah.
So let's see. What else do I want to say to you? I think that's about it. That's really important. And what else here? Well, I guess the last thing I would say is I'm a little concerned about some of the senior exodus of the senior staff, because these were the people who knew some of the standards, and I think some of the newer people don't, and we as residents are experiencing what's different in our environment because of that. Like the new tables that came with those legs that are so high,
Well, I've heard the story on those, because apparently there were 3 categories, and the category was, I think it was standard, which happened to be 2.5 inches higher than card tables.
I know.
They're sending all those legs back and getting new ones.
Our money.
Well, yes, it's true. Well, our time is up, and I appreciate your coming on Who's Who.
Well, and we both survived it.
We did. And